Hello, how's it going, Michael?
Yeah, good, good. You can hear me loud and clear?
Yes.
Perfect. So we have at least a quorum now. Guys, I would like you
Yes.
to welcome Brittany Joiner with a lot of applause as she presents to us Trello Automation.
Hi, everyone.
So let
I'm gonna
me,
take I'm gonna take a screenshot real quick. I wanna show. Let me see. I'm trying to figure out how to do this here. I wanna take a
yeah,
screenshot and show we're all together. Whoa, nice.
nice.
All right, everybody, smile. All right, we'll save that one. And where did it go? Oh no, now I've lost my other tab. Um, yeah. So how's everybody doing? How's everything going so far this morning?
So far, so good. Here it's actually in the evening. It's
Oh,
around
that's right. It's
6.
evening for you all.
Yeah, so that means you guys, how are you doing? I might say we are fine and you're not. You're good?
Yeah,
Everyone is good. Yeah.
that's awesome. That is awesome. Well, I'm very appreciative for you all have letting me join. Super excited to be here, and I love talking about Trello. So I'm happy to kick things off if we're ready.
Ready whenever you are.
Awesome. Okay, perfect. Well, so first of all, my name is Brittany Joiner. I don't think I've met most of you before, but I am obsessed with Trello, and that's how I fit into this Atlassian community. Is that I used Trello before it was even acquired by Atlassian, and I probably started using it about, I think the official date is like 13 years ago. Like I started using it in like 2011, and I used it for a company I worked with and kind of tucked it away as like, "Oh, this is a good tool to know about," and, like, that's fine, and then I kind of forgot for a little bit, but then I started building out processes with it personally, like, in my own life to organize myself and do things, and I just kept getting better and better with it, and, eventually I became some sort of guru, I guess, with it, where people were coming to me and asking me questions, and I started creating content about the questions I was being asked and things. And when Atlassian acquired Trello back in, I think that was 2017, that's when I got involved in the Atlassian community and started answering questions online. I hosted some Trello events for a little while, and then kind of stopped, like the in-person ones, then kind of stopped doing that. And then now I've gotten kind of back into with virtual events, and I have my own sort of Trello Atlassian chapter called the Trello Trailblazers. And I'll send over some links and stuff to all the things I talk about today, that being one of them. But I have my own Atlassian chapter where I talk about Trello there. I also have a YouTube channel where I put out content, all sorts of videos about how to do things on Trello, from automation to using power ups to, very basic things as well. And so I do that, and I have a weekly newsletter. So I post about power ups, I post about tips and tricks, different use case ideas, and so I do that every week on my newsletter. And then lastly, I wrote a book about Trello. So this I completed about a year ago, and I wrote an entire book. I actually have a copy of it here. You can get it online on Amazon and from Pact in a couple different places, and I'll include again some links to that as well. But yeah, suffice to say, I am obsessed with Trello. I have been voted like most likely to get a Trello tattoo. I don't have one yet, but and any day now, I could see myself getting one. So so that's kind of why I'm here talking to you about Trello. I'm based in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in the United States. It's kind of close to Texas. How many folks here? Has anyone here been to the U.S. before? Show of hands. No one's been to the US before? Okay. Well, let me tell you, where I live, it's not like anything else you'd have seen anyway, so I might as well be on a different planet, because Louisiana is different from what you think of from like New York or California or any of those places. It's very, very different. So, don't worry, you're not missing too much here. So, but that's where I am based, and Yeah, I'm excited to get started, and I've got some slides here prepared, but I also want this to be a little bit more of a workshop and interactive. And so I've done this format with some other groups before. And what works really well is feel free to ask me if you have any questions as we're going along. But basically, I'm going to show you what's possible with Trello automation. I'll give you kind of a quick overview just in case you're like, what is Trello? I'll let you see what it is. And then I'll show you how we'll use automation to kind of supercharge it. And I'll give you like the principles. And then I'm just going to kind of go around and show you how to do different things in there and how I use it. And I'll also open up some discussion questions to kind of help you all think through how maybe you would use it. And if anyone has any questions, you can stop me along the way. And I'm also happy to. I see some of you got your laptops. If you want to set up automations in Trello and you need help with it, just let me know. And I'm super happy to do that with you all. So to kick things off, I'm going to show you a basic Trello board here. Okay. I like to describe Trello. It's like a digital whiteboard with supercharged sticky notes. So imagine if you could create a whiteboard and you had different lists or columns in it, and you had little sticky notes that you could drag around and put in different places. That's exactly what Trello is. At its most simple level, that's what it is. And you can access this whiteboard from your computer. You can access it from your mobile phone. They have an iOS and Android application. You don't even need internet to access it. You can access it like sometimes when I'm on an airplane or somewhere without Wi-Fi, I can still go to Trello and like add cards, and then it'll like actually save them later when it connects to Wi-Fi, but I can still see things in there. So it's literally a digital whiteboard that you can access from anywhere. And the supercharged sticky notes part is because these little sticky notes, they're not just any sticky notes. You can do amazing things with it. You can add due dates to these sticky notes. You can add checklists. You can add members. You can add these little tags. We call them labels. You can add attachments like files, like images or links to other pages. You can add covers to style them and make them look cool. You can add images up at the top. You can add locations to them even. And so I use this when I'm planning a trip. I'll add a location and I could say something like Disneyland, and it's going to, open up that location on there, and then I can actually view all of my cards on a map. So you can do all sorts of things with these sticky notes. And this is just the core stuff. You can always add power-ups that'll let you do even more to them. And so that's what Trello is. And the beauty of automation that I say what helps me with it is that I like using Trello to tell me, to have in front of me of what to do, to capture all of my ideas. And when I wake up in the morning, see what I need to do, whether that's for work, for personal projects, for things around the house, for meal planning. I like to use automation to sort all of that out for me so it knows what I need to do and things are categorized and organized and queued up properly for me. So that's why I like using automation. And there's a couple things you need to know when you're getting started with Trello automation. So, first of all, automation consists of two parts. Has anybody here used any other sort of like automation stuff, whether it's like with Jira or Confluence, or maybe you've used other tools like Zapier or Make or I'm trying to think of some others, but has anyone here done anything with automation in like any other tools at all? You can just raise your hand if you have. No? Okay. All right. I'm going to teach you stuff about automation then. Okay. So there's two things whenever you're building an automation, no matter what tool you're using, you're going to need to know two concepts. Okay. This is going to apply to anything you ever want to build and automate. You're going to need a trigger and you're going to need an action. And the way that I like to think of this is, let's say you've got something you want to automate. All right. Let's not even say it's in Trello. Let's say when you're at home, maybe when you walk into your bedroom, you want the light to turn on. Okay. Let's pretend we're building an automation for that. So, what I like to do when making an automation is say, make that statement. What do I want to do? Well, when I walk into my bedroom, then I want my light to come on. So, that statement right there, that's your automation statement. And you may not realize it, but that statement is made up of a trigger and an action. And the first part is the trigger. The trigger is, when do you want this to happen? And so typically you'll find your trigger by thinking about how you want to automate something, like that statement, and it'll either be whatever comes after when or if. So you might say, when I walk into my bedroom. That's the trigger. When you physically, walk into your bedroom. It could also be if the temperature gets below 90 Fahrenheit, or maybe it's like, something else with that. Maybe it's in Trello example, maybe it's when a card is added to my board, or, if you're more used to Jira, when an issue is added to my project. That is your trigger. And every automation needs some sort of trigger so it knows when to happen and when to actually do the next part, which is the action. And so take that automation statement: when I walk into my bedroom, turn on my light. That second part is your action, and that's what to do when the trigger happens. So all these examples we've been talking about, your trigger is walk into the bedroom, your action is turn on the light. Maybe, for another example, your trigger is if it's less than 90 degrees Fahrenheit outside. Maybe your action is make a reminder to tell me to bring a jacket, or I don't know, something like that. Or in, when a card is added to a Trello board, assign it to me. That's the action. That's the thing you want it to do. So every automation is made up of that. It's a trigger saying, when do I want this to happen? And then one or more actions. You could have multiple actions, right? You could say, when I walk into my bedroom, turn on the light and open my book, or, play some relaxing music. You could have multiple different sort of actions, but you're always going to have a trigger and at least one action. So that's important to know for any sort of automation, but especially in Trello, as I'll show you, there's different types of triggers and different types of actions. And so when you want to make an automation, I recommend, and instead of just going in here and thinking, oh, let me automate everything, start by thinking about what you actually would want to automate. And again, if you haven't used Trello very much, or if you're new to it, it's going to take you a little bit of time, because you're going to want to play around with these and really see, oh, this is what I end up doing all the time. I've noticed that, on Monday, I always drag a card from my new list over to do. I do that every Monday. Like, well, you might start realizing, oh, maybe every Monday or when it's Monday is a trigger. And so you'll start thinking through things like that. And then that's when you'll pair it with the different types of triggers that we have. And so Trello Automation has a couple different types of triggers, and I'm going to show you what those are. So first of all, when you want to automate something in Trello, you're going to click this lightning bolt here on your board. It's going to go to automation. You can click any of these options. I just always go to rules, but it's going to open up this modal that gives you all sorts of things here. Don't get too overwhelmed with all that's going on here right now. But you can think of all of these things right here as your triggers. So let me walk you through what they are. So rules. These are triggers for when a specific thing happens in Trello. And so maybe your thing is when a card is added to a board. Well, that is a thing that's happening in Trello. Or maybe it's when I'm added to a card. Or maybe it's, when a card has this label or starts with the name Brittany, or, something like that. When someone posts a comment on a card, when a checklist is added. There's literally, I think, hundreds of triggers, but or inside this rules section. But it's basically when something happens to a Trello card. And I'd say a lot of your automations are probably going to live in here. But your other automation types, you've got scheduled automations. And so some of your triggers here are based on a time schedule. So if we've got any developers here and you're familiar with building any sort of like any automation jobs, like as a developer, you might have heard the term cron jobs. This is kind of Trello's version of that. And basically, if your trigger is something like when it's Monday, drag a card from this list, or create a new card, or every day, maybe you want a new card created every day to remind you to I don't know, like brush your hair or something, or read something in a book, or I don't know, send Michael a thank you note for all that he does for you all. Maybe you want a reminder for that every day. You could use a trigger for every day. That's kind of your when when the day begins sort of statement there. So that's the schedule triggers. And then there's another kind called due dates. And this has more to do with if your trigger or your when statement relates to when a card is becoming due. So, for instance, let's say I have a card that's due on Friday. Well, maybe when that card is due, I want it to move into my to-do list. Or maybe the Monday before it's due, I want to move a card into the to-do list. And so you can see there's different triggers that relate to a card coming due, being past due. You could say, a card's due after a card is overdue, move it into my overdue list. That way you have one list to kind of work through there. And so those are kind of the core due date triggers there. And then lastly, there's card and board button triggers. And these are specific buttons that you can add to a board or to cards. And the way you trigger it is by clicking that. And this is useful if you're like, I have something that I know my action statement, and I know that I always want to create a card. I want to add myself to it. I want to add this checklist. I want to do these things, but it's not always on Monday. Sometimes it's on Friday, and it's not there's not a consistent trigger. Like it's not like a specific time. It has nothing to do with when a card is coming due. It has nothing to do with like other events in Trello. It's just maybe not consistent. But you can still create a card or board button so that when you do it, you don't have to do all of the actions. There's just one tiny step where you click that button, and then you can see what it does here. I have a template card that creates an add request card, which goes ahead and adds a card to the board with this description preset. So someone can, let's say I need them to request an advertisement. They can explain what they want, and that's all right here. They don't have to do that from scratch. So those are the types of triggers that you have available. And that's how you'll always start your automation, is by thinking how you want to trigger it, going to that section in Trello's automation, and you'll go to, they'll all say create automation. You'll add your trigger, and you'll see the different options that relate to that. And so the next part is, let's say we've got our trigger sorted out. We want to do when a card is added to the board. The next part is our action. And Trello has so many actions. They're going to change a little bit depending on what your trigger is. So for instance, if you're using a board button, your available actions might look a little different than if you're using a card button, or if you're using, for instance, like a rule trigger. But you'll the more you play around with it, you'll start to kind of get used to it and see what it's all like. But there's so many options for these, right? So let's say when a card is added to the board, I could do all sorts of things here. I can move the card to a specific list. I can add a new card. So maybe when someone makes that add request card, then when that's added to the board, maybe I actually want to make a new card that reminds me to go do something with it. I could add a label to the existing card. I could add a sticker to it, which is Trello's sort of style pieces of I'll show you what this looks like, but it basically it's like adding a little graphic to the card. You could add a link to it. So again, maybe when someone adds a card to the board, you want to add a link to go to, I don't know, something in Confluence or one of your pages that has more information or something. You can remove any items from it. And so maybe if someone added a card but then assigned your colleague, and you don't actually want them to do the assigning, you want to do the assigning, you could say just remove all the members and then use automation to add whoever you want to it. You can even change the color of the list. This is a Trello premium feature, or sorry, standard and premium, but you could change the color of the list. So maybe you want a list to be a specific color if there's a new card that's been added to it. You can change due dates. So you could set due dates. So you could say when a card is added to the board, maybe I want to set the due date to the next Monday. So that way I know that it's not going to get forgotten, and I want to, make sure that that card is on my radar. You could add checklists. So maybe when something is added to a card, there's a list of things that you need to do. Maybe you want to check manually, you want to come in and check, does this have everything I need? Or maybe it's, I need to reach out to somebody and tell them how this works, or what to do with it, or I need to go talk to somebody about whatever. You can build your own checklist and have it added to the card here. You can do things with members. You can join the card, which is going to automatically assign you to it, or you could specifically add, any other member of that board to your card. You can add a member at random. So this is really cool because I see a lot of teams will use this for trying to kind of delegate tasks in a style of saying, maybe if a bug is added to the board, we'll just have one of a random team member is assigned that to take it. You can also say not to do it at random, but you could say in turn, and that's basically going to make sure it alternates evenly. So for instance, let's say it's me and Michael on this board. It wouldn't always randomly add, me. It would say, oh, we just added Brittany to one, so now we're going to add Michael. Or, oh, we just added Michael to one, so now we're going to add Brittany. Like, it keeps that in turn. So that's pretty useful. And again, you can remove members from the card. You can change content on the card. So you could rename the card. Let's say, maybe you want to append or prepend something to it, for instance. So you want to say, when the card is added to the board, maybe you want new in front of it. And then you can use what we call Butler variables, which I'll tell you more about that in a second. But basically, if you wrap certain words in these brackets, it will keep that value dynamic for each time you run a card. So what's going to happen is, let's say I've added a card to a board called test. Well, this is going to say now new test, because it's going to keep what was there, but apply, new in front of it. And I'll go ahead and tell you about automation variables. They used to be called Butler variables. Now they're called automation variables, but I'll include a link to this for y'all. I'll actually go ahead and put it in the chat just so I can keep remembering which links I've promised to share with you all. But this is kind of advanced automation stuff, but it's really good to know because it lets you really build dynamic automations. And so you could rename the card. You could, what else do we want to do? We could change the description. We could post a comment. So that's a good way to say, hey, so-and-so, can you look at this card that's been added? We could even send email notifications. So let's say you want an email when a new card is added to a board. You could set that up here to send you an email every time a new card is added to a board. You can also interact with APIs and do HTTP requests. So again, this is more of an advanced level. I probably won't really get into that too much today unless someone has specific questions around it. But just know that that is something that you can do if you need to get information from another application that you then want to use in your automation. You also can use fields. So let's say you have custom fields. This is a Trello standard or higher plan feature where you can add custom fields. So on those supercharged sticky notes, if you're like, I actually want a field that says something like priority, well, you can make that. And then you can use automation to set that value. So maybe you do have a field called priority. Well, you can set it to be high as soon as a new card comes in, or set it to be low, maybe until someone tells you otherwise. You can also sort. So you could sort cards that are in a list. So maybe when a new card is added, for instance, I use this for one of my boards. Whenever I add a new card to a list, I want it to sort all of the cards in that list alphabetically so I can find them. So you could sort by all sorts of different things in here. You can see by how old it is, how long it's been in that list, by dates, by name, all sorts of things there. You can also sort by custom fields or labels. So that's kind of cool. And then Cascade, this is again some like really advanced actions we're getting into here. But let's say maybe when a new card is added to a board, you want to go find another card and do something on that, or find another card and look up something from that and then do that on your original card. That's when you're going to use Cascade. There's some other sort of things in there. Maybe for each checklist item on the card, you want to make a new card. That's when you're going to use the Cascade section. And then there's others with, other Atlassian tools with Jira. Let's say, again, maybe when someone adds a card to a board, you actually also want to create a Jira issue. Well, you can connect to Jira and you can do that here as well. some Bitbucket automations. And if you're using Slack, you can do things like post messages to Slack and share dynamic information about that. So for instance, you could post a message to Slack that says card name was just added to, let's see, what's the one for board? Cardboard name. Yeah. And so you could specify then a channel. Let's see. Yeah, we'll do it. We'll try this in general here in a workspace, and you can say how you want to post it. So I've got a whole string of actions here, and I'm going to show you what this looks like here in a second. But let's say what I'm saying here is when a card is added to the board, I want you to add a check sticker to it, set the due date to next Monday, join the card, which is going to add me to it, rename the card to new, then whatever the card name was before, post a message with the card name saying, post a message in Slack saying card name was just added to this board. So, all right, so I'm going to save this now, and I'm going to show you what this looks like here, okay? So let's say, wherever I want to make a card here, let's say I want to say unlocking Trello efficiency and hit enter here. And now watch and you'll see my automation slowly happens here. So we got the check, we've got the due date, and we've got me added here. And let me see, I can bring up my Slack over here and you'll see there should be a message sitting there for me. Oh, I see right here, General. Butler, unlocking Trello efficiency was just added to live learning demo board. And we see now that's because it didn't get the card name. It all happened too quickly. It doesn't have the new in front of it here. But you can see it's got that over here. It prepended the new to it. So that's at a core how automation works. And so that's the different sort of types of actions. There's the advanced actions. And again, this is just kind of the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more you can do with this if you start using other tools like Zapier and Make. These are other sort of like external automation tools that also work with Trello, where you can say, when certain things happen in Trello, do this. I recommend using tools like Zapier or Make if you're trying to integrate Trello with other tools. Like anybody here using like Google Sheets? So if you were using Google Sheets or other sort of tools, maybe you want something in Gmail, maybe whenever you get a new Gmail, you want to create a new card in Trello. That's where you would use something like Zapier. So you could say, when this happens, if your trigger happens in another app, you could say, then go do the action in Trello. Or if you want, when a new Trello card is created, to add a row to Google Sheets, this is where you can make your action happen in another application. So I will go ahead and pause there for a minute and take a breath and a sip here. But are there any questions anybody has or anything based on what we've chatted about so far? I think you all might be on mute if someone is asking something.
Yeah, so Brittany, there is a question.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Joseph Nyongesa.
Hi.
Just wanted to know, can a company have, an organization have a Trello, use Trello at the same time with Jira?
Yes. A lot of places will use both Trello and Jira. So that's a really good question. And I actually I'm going to include a link to this as well. I have an event I think it's next week or maybe the week after, but I'm going to be chatting more about how you can decide when you should use Trello versus Jira. Here we go. I'm posting a link to that in the chat over here. And again, I'll include that in my wrap up a list of links and things. But there's definitely a lot of places that will use both Trello and Jira. And the quick answer to that is typically if you're already using Jira and it's working perfectly for you, then that's great. I'm not going to tell you to replace all of your workflows and use Trello with it instead. But if you find that it's a lot of work to get started with using Jira when maybe you've just got a small project. Like, for instance, maybe you want to keep track of meals at or maybe that's more of a personal use, but maybe, for instance, you want to keep track of other things you need to do at work besides your specific features and bugs and things you've got in Jira. It might be easier to spin up a Trello board and just keep track of tasks over there, because you can literally create a board and I'll show you. It takes 2 seconds. I can say create a board, Brittany's private work tasks. Hit create, and boom, I can say to do, doing, done. And I can just add book trip to team 24, or whatever sort of things you got in here. Order new pens, make reminder to come into office, build office schedule, whatever sort of things you've got in here that don't naturally fall in Jira, you can add them in here, and that just took me seconds to do. Sure, if you're very quick and fast at Jira and that works just as well for you, then go for it. Maybe you don't need both. But you definitely can use both. I also see in a lot of organizations, development focused teams will use Jira, but other teams like marketing will kind of feel like a deer in the headlights when they see a Jira project and be like, what do I do? I don't know what to do. Or if you're working with clients, they may feel very intimidated to come into your Jira boards. Or what do they call them? Jira projects. And that's where I see Trello working really well, because it might be easier to, this is much more approachable, right? It's much easier to send this to someone and say, drag something around or click it and do what you need to. There's not other buttons here or too many things in the UI that they can break or mess up, or just even get confused by. So that's kind of my short and sweet answer to when you would use both and can you use both. But I posted a link in the chat, and if you get a chance, I think it might actually be pretty late in the day for you all, but it should be recorded. So if you RSVP to that event, you should be able to, I think, get the recording to it. And I'm going to do a whole hour-long talk about basically Trello and Jira and how to decide maybe Trello might be better for certain projects. And so, yeah, I would encourage you to check out for that. But yeah, that's a really great question. I get asked that a lot. Okay, so I'm going to now go on to like some other sort of things that I call this like my bonus content. When if you get a copy of my book, I write part 2. There's 3 parts in my book, and part 2 is all about automation. I go through super. Oh, do we have another question?
Yes, there's more questions.
Yes. Oh, perfect. I love it.
Hello.
Speak the mic.
I'm Enokofula. I'm new and I've been using Trello for a while now. I'm a developer. So my question is, when it comes to using Trello with GitHub, basically it's a power up, not an automation. I don't know, I wanted you to clarify a bit on how the two are related and how I can be able to utilize. I've been trying to use it, but I've not been getting. So you can talk about it, Trello and GitHub.
Yeah, so using Trello as a developer and utilizing it, is that the question?
Yeah, the question was about automation versus power.
Automation versus power ups. Okay, got it. No, that's a great question as well. So power ups, I would say, let's go back to our Trello boards over here, and I'll show you the power up directory here. So they're right next to each other on any Trello board. If you want to look at power ups, click that rocket ship icon there, and you can go to add power ups, and this will take you to the power up directory. So to your question about automation versus power ups, I would think about what you're trying to do first. And again, that's why I always come back to, instead of just randomly adding power ups or randomly adding automations, think about what you're doing in your Trello workflows. And so, you mentioned you've been using Trello for a little bit. Think about what are things you're doing that maybe there's problems or redundancies that you're seeing, or something you wish could be better about it. For instance, maybe you're like I wish like I could see something different about my cards, or maybe you're like I wish I want to see reporting on like how many cards I get done a week or something like that. And when you have that sort of problem statement, that's when you can go and say, let me see if there's a power up that does what I'm looking for. And it might be, for instance, let's say reporting. There's a bunch of reporting power ups. And so if you're trying to keep track of how many cards you did in a week, well, that's probably going to fall more under reporting. Sure, you could do some stuff with automation with that, but I'd recommend reporting power ups first. Whereas maybe you're like, I want to actually keep track of these very specific things, or like I want a list of cards to tell me what is on my plate. Like I there's too many cards on my board. I want to have just a list of ones that are mine. Well, you can kind of look around and see like sorting and see if there's something here that makes sense for you. But for the most part, something like that is probably going to be more suited to automation, because you're going to want to say, oh, well, because, when a card is assigned to me, move it over here. Whereas power-ups are going to, they're kind of going to be more specific use cases, if that makes sense. They're going to be more suited to solving a specific problem rather than interacting with every action in your Trello board, if that makes sense. And so, a good way to think about that is like what, again, are you trying to trigger something? So are you trying to say, when this happens, I want all of these other things to happen? If you're saying that, then you probably want an automation. If you're saying, I need another field on all of my Trello cards, and I want that field to look nicer, well, that might be a power up, because that's not a when sort of statement, right? You're not saying, when a card is created, add a new field. You're saying, well, on my board, I want new fields on all of my boards, and I want to make them look really nice. Or maybe you're like, I want different views of things. So for instance, maybe you're like, I want to view these cards a little differently, or you want to add an enhancement to the way a card looks, or different information that's going to show up on it. That's another time you're going to want to lean into a power up for those sort of things. Does that answer the question?
Yep.
Awesome.
Not really.
Cool. Oh, no?
It says, can you come and maybe seek clarification? Yes.
And speak to this mic. Yeah?
Okay. So my question was GitHub, to be specific.
GitHub.
The GitHub Power. Yes, the GitHub Power. So I've been trying to use it, but I've not. Okay, I've not seen. Okay, I've said that. What am I trying to do with it? So I thought maybe I could automate something. Okay, now that you're talking about it, now you said you've been using Trello for like many years, so I think you can.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the question, just to clarify, is around GitHub and Trello, basically.
Yeah, seems so.
Yes. Okay. It's a great question. So I will be honest, I don't use this feature as much. It depends a lot on what you're trying to do with GitHub and Trello, but there is a power up, as you can see here. I'll include the link for it here so you can find it easily. But if you go to the power up directory, search GitHub, it's going to come up right here. It depends on kind of what you're trying to do with it, but for the most part, I just find it makes the it adds details to your cards about a like, for instance, an issue or a pull request, and so you can see some items with that. It's not going to automate much with that. So if you're looking for something that's like, when I'm using, when a GitHub issue is closed, update my, like, archive my Trello card, that's when you're going to need to use some sort of syncing tool, whether that's Zapier, like I was mentioning, about interacting with multiple apps, or you might use a tool like Unito, which this is a bit of a pricey tool, putting it in the chat here. But this is another tool that can sync Trello with other tools. So what you could do is effectively something like, when a Trello card is archived, close that issue in GitHub. So if you're wanting to have that sort of two-way sync, I'd recommend going that route. But if you're just looking for displaying more details about GitHub, so for instance, maybe you've got a card and you want to display more details about that issue from GitHub without having to open a new tab, look for the GitHub issue, blah, 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 then that's where you might find it useful to add the GitHub power up. Does that clarify it?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, good. Yeah. Glad to hear that. Any other questions?
Yes.
Awesome.
So if you have a question, can you come closer, please, so that you can save some time? Yes.
Hello, my name is Zotero Brand. You mentioned tools like for the automation, like Butler. So how can I use Butler to automate tools in Trello for my project workflow?
For what was that last part? For project workflow?
Like how can I use automation tools in Trello, like Butler, to automate my project workflow?
Your project work. Yes. So basically everything I've been talking about right now is Butler. Trello's automation suite used to be called Butler. Everything I have shown you so far today with the automation. So when you click this lightning bolt and you go to rules, this is all Butler. And for everybody who's wondering, wait, I thought you said Trello automation. Here's the history behind it. Butler used to be a power up that lets you automate all sorts of things in Trello. It looks similar but different to what you see today. But basically, Trello bought that power up and then embedded all of that functionality directly into the product. So there's no power up needed. It's just part of Trello. And so Butler is just Trello automation. They're the same term. It's just like an older term for it. And because I've been around so long, I and it seems like you probably have too, if you've heard that term Butler, because Trello is trying to just rename everything to automation, but it's the same thing. It's just the older term for it. So, and in terms of how you can utilize that to optimize your workflows, that's kind of everything, we've been talking about here overall, is thinking about in your workflows, what are specific problem statements you have. And so if you're trying to figure out, well, when a card is due, send me an email about it, or when a checklist is completed, move the card to another list. That's your statement that you want to work with, and that's where you just need to match what is that trigger to which trigger type is that. And it's like, okay, well, maybe if it's when a checklist is completed, you could say when all checklists are completed on a card, maybe that's when you want to move the card to a list called closed or something like that. And so that's how you use automation to improve those process workflows, is by thinking through things you're manually doing and then figuring out what are the triggers and actions associated with that, and tie it to those sections of this Butler / Trello automation, which is all the same thing here. So does that help?
Yes.
Awesome.
Any other question?
Thank you so much. Please proceed.
Yeah.
Brittany.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Yeah. No, super glad. And yeah, feel free to just, come off mute and interrupt me at any point if you think of more questions too. But yeah, and so we kind of got into some of these sort of things, but one of the things that I like to talk about, things that Trello is, this is where I was saying in my book, part 2 is all about Trello automation. And so I have very specific rules. You probably won't be able to see it super well in like since I think the screen share is showing my screen, but my camera, like I have written down specific rules that you can use and how you would set them up and different use cases for them. And so again, I'll include a link to this as well. But this is and it's a digital book too. You don't have to just get the physical book. There's a digital one, but it walks you through a lot of those specific things that, you're asking about. How would I optimize? Well, I walk through tons and tons of examples of how would I use these sections to automate and optimize things. Like, how would I use scheduled automations? Like what kind of automation would I use for every day? What kind of automation would I use for due dates? And so I walk through like super specific examples of that in the book. But there are some things I don't cover in the book that I want to share with you all here today too. One thing, I don't really talk a lot about things that are not great for automating. And there's two things here that I would recommend. And this kind of plays into, you know, some of the questions about when would I look up something for power-ups instead of automation. First of all, depending on what you're trying to do with checklist items, so the items in a checklist, sometimes automation is good for that, sometimes it's not. You don't have as many options for automating the items of a checklist as you do a Trello card. So if you're using a lot of checklist items and you're wanting to, like, there's some workarounds for it that you can do, but for the most part, automation works much better at a card level than a checklist item level. And number two is retroactive actions. And so what I mean by that is, let's say you're like, well, I want to add myself to every card on a board. And you're like, that's an automation statement, right? When I add myself to a card, or when a card is added to the board, add me. The problem is, I've set up this rule now, but it won't go apply to every existing card on the board. If you want to apply things to cards that are already existing, what you'd probably want to do is use a power up called bulk actions. And I have an example of that on another board I'll show you here. But let's say I actually wanted to add myself to all of these cards on here. Well, I can't make an automation that says go find all of the old cards and add me to them. But what I can do is use this bulk actions power up to say I can select multiple cards and apply an action to it. So let's say all of these cards. I can click this checkbox and it's going to select all the cards in that list. And then I can do bulk actions like add a member to it. And you can see change the members. And it's going to it's added me to all of those cards. Or maybe I don't actually want to do that. Maybe I want to, maybe I had someone leave my team and I want to remove someone from all of those cards. Well, I can select them and uncheck it. And it's going to, undo all of that. So that's where I would recommend using a power up if you're trying to do something retroactively. And the bulk actions power up, I'll include. Let me get a link to that as well. Power ups, bulk actions. That's a really good one. That even if you're not ever interested in automation, it's a really good one to have if you're trying to edit multiple things on your Trello boards. Another thing. I very briefly touched on it for you all, but this is where they used to be called Butler variables. I still tend to call them that, but they're actually called automation variables now. But these are these dynamic values that you can insert in your automations to grab things from a card. So you saw how in the Slack message, it grabbed the name of the card and the board name. Well, that's because I used one of these things that shows the card name, where it will dynamically grab that each time. So let's say I make a new card in this live learning board here. Another new card. Notice that I didn't change that automation rule. That one we made, at the beginning of the class, that still works. You can see it still added the right due date, added me, added that. But if you look at the Slack message now, it shows the name of that card. So it's basically putting a dynamic value without me having to go set it. It knows what the name of the card is and it's injecting it in different places. And so these are really, really useful to use for lots of things. I like using primarily these date ones are pretty helpful. So for instance, let's say I want to make an automation for maybe I want a board button and I want it to create a list for this week. I can say this week, add an action, and I'm going to say list, create a new list named, and this was when I will say week number to do. And notice I put it in those brackets, so that means it's going to be a dynamic value. And you can say, again, you can check what you have available here, but we've got week number here. And so I can confirm that's how that's meant to look. And I'm going to hit that plus sign. It's going to do that. I'm going to hit save. And now notice I've got this button here that says this week. When I click that, it's created, you could see it's dynamically grabbed that 36 week number and it has, made to do. And so next week, when I go hit that same button, it's going to say 37 because it's going to grab whatever's happening when it runs. So that's something that, again, it's a little more advanced, but it can really, really be super powerful with your automations. Also using APIs. I mentioned this kind of briefly too. Another sort of advanced concept, but let's say, for instance, maybe, back to talking about GitHub, you could, in theory, it's a lot more work, but you could, in theory, say, maybe when a card is added to close. So let's say when I've, gotten rid of a card, you could potentially go to this content and use use the GitHub API to get or post information about it and say, close that issue. Again, this depends how familiar you are with the GitHub API. If you're not at all familiar with it, then that's when I'd recommend using something like Unito, like I already said, or something like Zapier. But if you are familiar with that API, then you might be able to do it just inside of Trello by posting the URL endpoint and the payload of, whatever. I'm not as familiar with it, but you probably have to say something about like issue status closed or something like that. So, so that's something, again, a little more advanced, but just good to know as you kind of journey on. Another thing, if you want to share automations with others, this is my biggest gripe about Trello. I would love to have made a Trello board with all of these automations that I wrote about and have talked about and say, here, go here and just click apply, and it will like add it to all of your boards. Trello doesn't make that easy. There's not really great ways to do that. The best way you can share automations, so let's say you're the Trello expert in your team and you've built these automations, but you want to, oh, you got a question? Oh, nope. Okay. I saw tapping on the mic. I didn't know if there's a question. But let's say you want to share these with other people on your teams. What you would need to do is you'd basically need to go explore these like automation libraries, and it's only a Trello premium feature, so you've got to be on a paid Trello plan. But if you do that, you can say go to these rules. You can add specific tags to these rules, and so you could say like demo or whatever, and then you could go to these demos and you could share it with other people in your workspace. So again, this is kind of limited in how useful it is because it's only with people in your workspace. It's only if you have a premium plan, and it doesn't really give you a great way for everybody to access and edit these rules. And there's more documentation on that here. I'm going to include a link if anybody wants to read a little bit more about it. But I would say this is basically, this is my wish list. If Trello could make this easier to do, that would be amazing. Libraries, there we go. Alrighty, I'm putting that link in there too. Yeah, I would also maybe have talked a little bit more about debugging and troubleshooting broken automation. And so that's where if something's not working, it's a good way to some good ways to debug are to try to figure out which parts of it do work. And so if you're a developer, you're probably familiar with this because this is going to be the same sort of debugging advice you would use for just about anything else. Try to isolate it, right? Maybe if you try an automation and it doesn't work, let's say that one we made today, there was a lot going on here, right? And if it doesn't work, what I may do is I may go through and say, well, this part works and this part works. This part works, but this one, it didn't rename the card correctly, or maybe it didn't grab the card name correctly. Well, that's where I would check and see, did I write the Butler or the automation variable correctly? Did I wrap it with that curly bracket on each side? Did I spell it right? Did I, go check over here and make sure, does that actually exist? Not that one. That's kind of a good debugging practice. And just break it down into each step. It kind of depends a little bit on each one. But if you all ever have any issues with you're trying to build a rule and it doesn't work, and you're like, I don't know why, that's where I recommend you head over to the Atlassian community. There's a specific Trello section here, and I try to be pretty active on here. But basically, you can come in here and you can post a question. So you can ask a question, and that's where, if you can give as much detail as you can. So you can say, I have a question, and, basically automation with dates or something like that. And then try to explain what you're trying to do, and then share any screenshots you can of the rule you have already. And then me or other people like me will be happy to come in and try to help you debug and answer your questions. So, and that's true of anything, even if it's not automation. So any of the questions, you have today that you've been asking, like if you're like, I use GitHub and Trello, should I use a power up or automation? You're totally welcome to come post that over here. And again, people like me will jump in and answer that and help you decide if you should use a power up or if you should use automation, or if you need something like Unito or what you're trying to do there. So I definitely recommend coming and hanging out in the Atlassian community section, the Trello section, if you have questions about Trello, because there's lots of folks over there, and we try to keep an eye on things there. So I would recommend that. And we also talked about already automating with other tools like Zapier and Make. So yeah, so just to kind of wrap things up here, basically I have some questions for like everybody to kind of think through. For you all, you don't have to answer these. These are kind of rhetorical. You can just kind of think through them in your head. But this kind of, if you think through these sort of questions, this is the slide I want you to take away. If you're like, what do I do with everything we just talked about? If you answer these sort of questions before or as you're reflecting on today, it should help you get the most out of this. So think about what are common activities you do in your boards. Maybe it's, I mentioned every Monday I create a new card with things I need to do this week, or every Friday I move all of my cards to done, or when a card moves into this checklist or this specific list, I add checklist items of do this thing, and do this thing. Well, could automation do those tasks? Hopefully, after today's session, you feel a little more empowered to answer those questions, because you would know how to take those statements and say, when a card moves into a list, and then you're like, oh yeah, that is a Trello trigger. And so you can then associate the action you need to do with that. So I would encourage you to think about that. Also think about, have you tried to use Trello automation before? And if you had any experience with it, was it difficult? Does it make more sense now? If yes, yay, that's awesome. If it does not, then again, I would encourage you to maybe like rewatch this for one. I know I tend to talk a little bit fast, and so that's when I get excited, I talk very fast. So feel free to rewatch this at a slower speed, or ask me questions. I have, as I've mentioned, I've got a YouTube channel. I'm going to put that link in the chat too. I've got a weekly newsletter where I literally answer people's questions. And so if you felt like maybe you didn't get quite everything out of it, subscribe to my newsletter, and every week I have a section. I call it Dear Taco, because Taco is Trello's mascot. It's a little husky puppy. You've probably seen him before. Let me see. Oh my gosh. Trello Taco Dog. Why is it not coming up? There we go. This is Taco. He's the mascot. And so I have a Dear Taco section where people can ask questions and I answer them. And oftentimes I end up making videos about them. So hopefully, if you that can be helpful for you as well, if you've got some questions. And then lastly, think about, if you do have any existing automations in your Trello board, are they working the way you want them to? And if they're not, do you feel comfortable troubleshooting and trying to figure out why they're not working? And hopefully you do, by either understanding now a bit more about how the pieces work, or you can come over to the Atlassian community, take screenshots, and ask your questions and get some support over there. So that's everything I had officially planned here to chat about today. But yeah, if there's any questions, happy to take any more questions. And otherwise, I'm happy to send you all with some links that hopefully make this a lot more clear, and we can keep on talking Trello together. Oh, I think you might still be on mute. You're on mute. I can't hear you. Oh, there we go.
Oh yeah, my name is Oliver. My question rolls down to the example you had shown on Slack, and how like you can integrate automation with where to like send a message in Slack. So like, my question comes, well, let's say for example, in our organization, we use a custom application for a custom sort of for communication. Let's for example, Skype, or maybe a different one specifically for organization. So like, is there a way like I can use? Does Trello provide a way of like integrating a platform? Let's say when oh, okay.
I think I understand what you're asking. Like basically, if you don't use Slack, how could you do those same things?
Yeah, exactly. This is
Yes.
Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe
So that's
Teams or
a
other things.
great. Sorry.
No, I'm saying with Teams, Slack, or any
Oh
other
yeah,
tool.
Teams. Yeah, that's a great question. So the answer is basically yes. There's a couple different ways I would go about that. So one, if I would look for a power up first. So let's say you do use Teams. I would see. I actually don't know if there's a Teams power up. Oh, there is. Okay, so there's a Teams power up here. I haven't used it because I'm not a big like Teams user. But whatever that tool that your team does use, look up and see if there's a power up here. Give that a try. It may be useful. It may not. It may be more like the GitHub one where it just kind of shows some information but doesn't really integrate. So that's option number one. See if that works. If that doesn't work, the other thing you could do is especially if it's a custom internal sort of tool, right? Does it have an API endpoint? Because if it does, that's where you could use automation and you can say, for our one about when a card is added to a board, this is going to load very slowly here, but you could use that that get or post to URL that I was showing you a second ago. That's where you could use that as an action to post that message to whatever tool that is. So, oh my gosh, we've made Trello automation so tired right now. It needs a break here to load, but here we go. So let's say you're trying, you do know that you have an API for your tool. You could say when a card is added to the board, it's where we go to content, and I would say post to, maybe that endpoint is something like, I don't know, Teams API endpoint or whatever that would be. Oh man, this is a bit wild depending on what your tool is. You probably have to look up a bunch of things here. Teams is not a good example because I'm imagining you have a more sort of like custom sort of tool or something and your own documentation. But let's say, there's you'd put the endpoint URL here with the payload and whatever that message is. And that's where you would say card name, created, or, however you need to format that. But probably going to look something a little bit like this. But that's how I would do it. So step number one, go look and see if there's a power up for whatever tool you use if it's not Slack. Step number two, if there's not a power up, see if that tool does have an API endpoint for posting messages. And if so, then you'll go to for your action, go to content, go to post to URL, put in that URL and give it the payload with the message that you need. And then it should function similarly to what you saw in Slack. So I hope that helps. It's hard to say without like seeing your specific tool, but again, feel free to like, if you want to post in the Atlassian community and say, this is the tool that we use, or like send a link to the documentation about it. Someone might be able to help you put together what that specific action would look like when you're setting up in Trello. But good question.
Yes, this is good. Anyone else? Yes, please, come over.
Hello. how does Trello handle a large-scale project with many cards and users, and are there any performance limitations to it?
That's a great question. So there's definitely a lot of people using Trello in different times. I tend to work with more smaller to medium-sized teams, but I do know that there are a lot of bigger brands that work with Disney or like work with Trello, for instance. Like Disney is one of them. Like Visa's another. Like if you look on the website, you can see that there's like some really big logos that do use Trello. And so I know that it does work with like larger companies and larger teams. I also have worked with people who, have literally hundreds of people on a board. I've been on boards where there's, a lot of members in there. The biggest things to note about Trello performance is that once you get over a certain number of cards, I want to say it's maybe like 1,000 in your board, it will slow down performance. But typically my recommendation is when you get to that point, long before it's a problem with performance, it's more of an issue of finding what you need in your Trello boards. And you'll probably want to break out into different boards long before it becomes a performance problem. It'll be more of like I can't find what I need. This system isn't working. There's too many things going on here. Let's move to separate boards and make them talk to each other, which often you will use automation to do. And then, yeah, that usually happens before there's ever like a performance problem. But if you do have, see Trello moving kind of slowly, it could be because if you have more than 1,000 cards in your board. That happens sometimes, but for the most part, I don't really see too much with it. If I'm being completely honest, I have noticed lately Trello moves a little slower if you have a lot of power-ups installed on a board, or not even a lot, just a couple. Like I've sometimes noticed that, it takes a little while for it to load this sort of like power-up menu, or like you saw just now, it took a little while for it to load that automation modal for us. But I don't usually see enough performance issues that it inhibits my workflows, if that makes sense. It's more of like waiting a second or two for things to come together, or like, you might have to wait up to a minute maybe for like an automation to run, but that's not usually too much of an issue. So it does seem to scale and work very well with large teams, and there's different ways of managing it at different scales that would help with any sort of performance issues.
Yes, any other question? Good? Yes, good. So I have this cliche question that I get every time. Why Trello and not Jira? Or why Jira?
Yes. Yes. It's a great question. And when I was at Team earlier this year and I was at the Trello booth, everyone asked me that. My standard answer is if you're using Jira and it's working fantastic for you, awesome. Don't use Trello. If you're like, I want to keep track of stuff, but I don't want to make a whole Jira project out of it, maybe try Trello. If you are having trouble with people actually updating Jira, so for instance, maybe you like using Jira, but you can't get your team to actually use it because they think it's too confusing or they don't know what button to click, try Trello. Trello is a lighter weight sort of user interface, so it's a little less cluttered, as you can see. I've got a lot on here at the moment, but it starts out like very clean, and there's not too much to click and distract yourself with, that it's often a lot easier for clients or even other people on your team to interact with. So that's my standard advice. If you're using Jira and it's working fantastic and you have no problems with it, awesome. But if like you're like, it's a bit more than I need sometimes, or other people aren't using it, they don't get it, try Trello. That's my line on it.
Nice. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Any last question? All right, give it up for Britney Joiner for a great presentation.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Brittany. Do you need to take another screenshot? You can stand and do something awesome and.
Yes. Oh, here. Yeah, I'll take another screenshot. If everybody wants to smile real quick.
Guys, stand up and do something.
Oh, stand up. Okay. Yeah. You got ready. Yeah.
Just a moment. 1, 2, go. Maybe
Oh, wait. There you go. 1, 2, go. Yay. Okay. I'm saving that. Yeah. This has
Thank
been
you so much,
awesome. Thank
Brittany.
you all.
Bye.
Enjoy your evening.
You too. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.